There's a drive! Way back! It might be! It could be! It is! Holy cow! Welcome to another broadcast of Bricks Behind the Ivy!
Hey, Cub fans, welcome to another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. Thank you so much to our awesome sponsors, Wrigleyville Sports, the best sports store in Wrigleyville, and Yaggy Road Roasting Company, based in Valpo, Indiana, serving cups of coffee just as special as the moments you drink them in.
Hello, welcome to Bricks Behind the Ivy.
Hey, Cub fans, welcome to Bricks Behind the Ivy. I am your hostess, the mostest, Jeff CandidCubs Fergauskas, bringing you all the best Cubs coverage in the entire world. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. And I'm sure all of you have really tired thumbs from this afternoon, in which, if you were like me, you're feverishly refreshing Twitter, refreshing all the social media sites in order to see what the Cubs did or didn't do, or what they were rumored to do here at the 2025 trade deadline. Let's get some housekeeping out of the way. There will be a live Bleacher Bunch show this evening with Danny Rocket and gang, also going over the trade deadline, and they will be talking their reactions in a much larger group. But given my schedule, I did want to react to the trade deadline and put an episode out there about the trade deadline, and this is the time that I have. It's all fresh in my mind, and so this is what I've decided to do. And, you know, at this point, it's tough to sit here and, be excited about what we saw. About what we were seeing in the trade deadline, what we saw as, the return that the Cubs got, the players that they attacked, and we're still kind of sitting here looking for answers and trying to figure out how we feel. At least that's where I'm at. If you have questions, comments about how you think Jed did, make sure you are leaving them if you're watching on YouTube, and we'll get them on the show and we'll talk about those as we go. But yeah, before we get started, I do want to get some housekeeping out of the way, because we do have some ad reads that we like to do, and today I want to make sure that you guys subscribe for this channel. If you're watching on YouTube, leave comments, like the videos, share them. If you listen on the audio platform, make sure you're liking and reviewing and subscribing. It's going to help us grow Bricks Behind the Ivy and find more brickheads just like you. And if you haven't already subscribed to the YouTube channel, you want to do that, because we have lots of shows on the Bleacher Bunch Network, including Cubs PS Plus with Mike Waller, Sun Ranto with Danny Rocket, Cup of Cubby Blue with Sarah Sanchez, the Bleacher Bunch Show, which is tonight. Make sure you're checking that out, and Baseball Rabbit Hole with Michael Cotton. And if you are a Patreon supporter of the Bleacher Bunch, you also will be able to get the daily Cubs reaction show called Cubs Pod. So make sure you're checking that out and seeing what you think about as we do daily recaps, just a bunch of different of us doing it. All right, so smoke is cleared. Pencils down, as we've heard this front office say several times on the 2025 trade deadline. And yeah, I think my immediate reaction and feeling is extremely complicated. I think I had expectations going to this deadline. There's been robust rumors with the Cubs attached. And, I think it's interesting. I had an episode that came out earlier this week about how the Brewers are good that I did with Jake McKibben. And he was talking about just how the Brewers information never really shows up in the national media because of just the different type of media coverage they have. And then for the Cubs, it's a little different for us. Our information does end up, ends up on, the national media coverage, because being a large market team, it provides interest, for people to tune in. There is an advantage in negotiations, the league that the Cubs are involved in something. There's an advantage in us being rumored to be involved in things. It's just a constant need for the Cubs to be involved, which, kind of goes into, I think, the longer point that I may end up landing on on today's trade deadline. So the Cubs did make, 4 moves. They got lefty Taylor Rogers, They got switch hitting utility player Willie Castro. They got Andrew Kittredge, who is a guy that I wanted the Cubs to get back in 2024. Ended up on the Cardinals that season. And they got not a newcomer to Chicago, Mike Soroka, which I joked last night that Danny Rocket is already writing the parody song that's pretty much writing itself to my Sharona. But, this is not a terrible group of players. They do, in theory, address needs that the Cubs have. And we'll kind of take a look at them one by one and talk about how they address it. And then we'll talk the elephant in the room. And if you're just joining us, leave your comments in the chat, and we can talk about your questions, comments, reactions, frustrations with this group, these moves on the show, as this is a live show. I want to also mention before we get going and talk about these players that today's episode is brought to you by Wrigleyville Sports, the best sports store in Wrigleyville. They've been around since 1990, adjacent to Wrigley Field. Make sure you are getting all your Cubs souvenirs from Wrigleyville Sports, and thank you for being a sponsor of Bricks Behind the Ivy. So first up, 34-year-old Taylor Rogers. He was a Cincinnati Red. He was a Pittsburgh Pirate, and now he's a Chicago Cub. He almost hit every NL Central team in one deadline, so congratulations, Taylor Rogers, for having to take a bunch of flights around the Midwest in the last few days. I'm sure you are super excited about that. This guy's, he's a good lefty reliever. The Cubs didn't have a ton of stuff from the left side. Maybe this is one of those things that they're seeing the lack of movement in Drew Pomeranz's fastball. There's been a diminished ride in the fastball, making him less effective. It's been a great story, but having a guy that, has done this in this game for a long time. He's a two-pitch pitcher. He's sinker slider. For a sinker pitcher, he doesn't really get a lot of ground balls this year, at least. Usually he's around like the 46th percentile in years past. But this year he is at the 38.5% percentile. And really, it kind of looks like there's not a ton of change in, his pitch profile. So I'm not entirely sure, without digging a little bit further, what that is. So can't go wrong with a lefty reliever. His numbers this year, he's got 2.45 ERA, 34 strikeouts in 33 innings pitched. So maybe Drew Pomeranz insurance. Not a bad move in a vacuum. Willie Castro, I think, is the best move the Cubs made at the deadline. This guy's a utility player, 28 years old, gets on base, an okay amount, 335, can play all over the field. He's not an excellent defender really at any of the positions, but he is serviceable. He's going to be able to provide relief for some of the Cubs. He'll be able to play third base. He crushes lefties. He's got an 870 OPS for his lefties, which the Cubs really needed someone, especially after Eugenio Suarez was off of the market. He really hits fastballs really well. He's got a plus 10 run value versus fastballs in 2025 with 456 slugging. So I would expect the Cubs are going to probably look at fastball cutter matchups to kind of get him in there, especially versus lefties, to give some spell to some of the guys on the team. Because really the Cubs have been rolling with the same group most of the year, and because the bench really hasn't been working for them. So hopefully this is a player that can, get into the games a little bit more than, Vidal Brujan and John Birdie, besides pitching of late, was able to do, and can really spell the team going forward. Another one, Andrew Kittredge, 35-year-old. He was on the Orioles this year. He hasn't pitched a ton. He's only got 31 innings pitched this year. Last year he pitched 70, so maybe he's got more in the tank. He's got a really good whip. He doesn't walk a lot of people. He's got a good K rate. He's got a good chase rate. He's a slider, sinker, four-seamer split guy. Doesn't throw the split a ton. The four-seamer is kind of, in comparison to the slider sinker, the four-seamer is a little bit, straighter, like the Cubs like to see. This is a profile of fastball that the Cubs have attacked in the past. So, at the end of the day, this is a good, solid move. Another guy for the bullpen, especially when you think of potential regression and concern around Ryan Pressly. As I said last night, he's been full Shania Twain of late. He does not impress me much of late. So the final piece the Cubs got, and this one is probably the most interesting, had the most controversy and theory around it, was Michael Soroka. He's been injured. He's still only 27. I feel like this is a guy that has been around the game for so long. He came up in 2018, believe it or not, and started at the age of 20. In 2019, he had an incredible season, 268 ERA, but his expected ERA was 408, so maybe a little bit better results than his actual metrics. Four-seamer, slurve guy. He pitched out of the pen a lot last year. This year, the Nationals signed him to be a starter. The discussion was about his fastball velocity had dropped. And Brendan Miller, if you're not following him, he's part of the Locked On, or not Locked On Cubs, I'm sorry, the CHGO Cubs Network with Corey Friedman. Very good analytical mind. One of my favorite people to follow on Twitter. He's talking about extension and how his extension had decreased in the last few weeks, which probably means that there's a mechanical tweak to, address the fastball. But this is technically the only starter the Cubs have got, and he might be more valuable as a reliever like he was last year, getting a lot of, strikeouts. His fielding independent pitching is what people have talked about. His ERA is 487, but he has been, unfortunately, just a victim of a terrible Nationals defense. So with the Cubs defense, which is one of their strengths, he should be a better player. But that's it. Those are the guys the Cubs got. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. Starting pitching, top-end starting pitching. Cubs obviously had been rumored on guys like Sandy Alcantara, Edward Cabrera. At one point, they were rumored with Taj Bradley before he was, demoted in the Rays system, and he was just traded for Griffin Jacks with the Twins. The Cubs were also rumored with Joe Ryan, Merrill Kelly, not much around Zach Gallen, if I recall, or if I'm not remembering correctly. Mackenzie Gore seemed to be someone they were pushing for. Enough push and movement on that end that, I had a midday conversation with Jake McKibben of the Brewer blogs where we were looking into his metrics and really looking at his reduced velocity and his increased walk rate and trying to figure out how he would help the 2025 Cubs. So this is kind of where, I'm landing, and, let me know in the comments if you agree or if you disagree with this thought process. I've always viewed the game of baseball with an empathetic lens and understanding that I don't have all the information, and I will never have all the information unless I, randomly become an MLB insider. But at the end of the day, I don't have all the facts. I don't know what the prices were. Maybe we have some post hoc from The Athletic, Sahada Sharma and Patrick Mooney, that gives us an idea of what the prices were. I guess we can get some solace in knowing that, Sandy Alcantara and Edward Cabrera weren't moved. A lot of the guys that the Cubs were rumored to be in on, they were not moved. And hey, here we go. Live right now, Ryan Pressly was DFA'd to make room for Taylor Rogers. So the Ryan Pressly era is over. The guy who, required that he be the closer in the trade and just didn't work out as much as I think he thought he would. He just wasn't the guy. But yeah, at the end of the day, the starting pitching, we're back to talking about the starting pitching, but the prices seem to be extremely high. We did see a lot of relievers, paid high-end relievers. We had AJ Preller doing AJ Preller things. Dylan Cease didn't move like it was discussed or expected. Merrill Kelly moved late. Zach Gallen stayed put. A lot of these guys stayed put. And so one of two things happened. The prices were truly astronomical, and the Cubs weren't comfortable with that and what they could provide to the 2025 team, and not just that, but what they could provide going forward at the cost of whatever prospects were involved. or these guys truly weren't as available as we thought, and they were testing the market given the high prices for relievers. So that's fine. Getting a top-end rotation arm in the middle of the season, hell, even in the off-season beyond free agency, is extremely difficult. It's going to cost a lot. We are in an era of pitching injuries. We're in an era of guys having this insane stuff, and there's a lot of volatility in their production. There's really not many top-end arms that are out there, so you're going to have to gamble. You're going to have to gamble in a lot of situations to get one. If you look at this offseason, really wanted the Cubs to look for some strikeout stuff somewhere and address this rotation by getting more strikeout stuff. They ultimately did not go after Corbin Burns, who's out for the rest of the year, who I thought would be a great addition. And there are other guys out there that have just not worked out for the teams that have acquired them. Like a lot of people were, you look at the deals that the Dodgers have made for like Tyler Glasnow and some other folks, in which like they were not ultimately like have been that healthy. And we had seen that the Dodgers like were this off-season winning major, like everybody was like pre-crowning them the World Series champion. They haven't run away with it because of health. Roki Sasaki has not been what people thought. Finding pitching is hard. It's extremely hard. And keeping pitching healthy is part of the game more than anything else. And with that in mind, that really adds to the thought that I needed the Cubs to add a starter. They have had Colin Ray and I guess Ben Brown, manning the back end of this rotation. And Ben Brown at times has been borderline unusable. He has one of the worst ERAs, if not the worst ERA for a starter in baseball this season. And Colin Ray has really regressed with like a 5.42 ERA in his last 3 or 4 starts. He's a great swingman, but when you're running that out, those two guys out every 5 days, those are 2 games and you're not even sure you're going to win. So the Cubs really needed to find a guy that not necessarily just 8 innings, like a Charlie Morton that was out there. Zach Gallen's been pretty terrible. Don't know what the final cost of like a Merrill Kelly ended up being, but maybe the Cubs weren't focused on that because they were really focused on trying to do a swing trade of let's get this guy for now and he'll also be good for later. And I think a lot of that focus was on the Marlins and the Nationals with Mackenzie Gore and Cabrera and Alcantara. And I haven't mentioned Joe Ryan, which the fire sale of the Twins seemed to keep them pretty occupied. So maybe agreeing on names or being in contact with them since they moved so many players wasn't necessarily as easy to do. Now, I'm not giving Jed or, Carter leeway in this situation. I'm just explaining, the logic and the empathetic approach of, how this could have come to be. So we're going to find details in the next few days. But it's hard for me to sit here and say we have 1 year of Kyle Tucker and the Cubs are a very good baseball team within a game or two of the best record in the National League, could be the 1 seed on the NL side of the tournament, and did not add enough to their team. They bolstered some holes, but they still don't have enough strikeouts in this rotation, which leaves, a lot up to chance for the BABIP gods. We still have mainly fly ball pitchers, which, if you're hitting a ball in the air, there's a likelihood that's going to be a better hit than the ball that's on the ground. The likelihood of a hit happening and a ball on the line driver in the air is much higher than hitting a ball right into the dirt. So the Cubs did not address that. And there really just wasn't a robust market of actual sellers. And so then what's the Cubs strategy? If they don't get a starter, I thought maybe they'd go around and fortify the bullpen, but we saw how expensive relievers were. Duran went for some high-end prospects. We saw Mason Miller go for the 3rd best prospect now of baseball because A.J. Preller is crazy. But, in that deal, like that kid's 18, they're talking about the other top prospects have been traded in deals in the past. They name-dropped like Eloy Jimenez and a bunch of other players that didn't pan out. So you have to take a risk at some point. And I think we're still in a moment where the Cubs appear to be like threading the needle. They want to have the sustainable winner, and they also want to have a team that competes. And they're still, gun shy is the word I'll use from post 2016 when they went all in and got Aroldis Chapman and then didn't address the team the way they should in the offseason because of whatever financial constraints that existed, for whatever reason they existed. and now they want to be able to have their cake and eat it too. And so now this middle ground behavior is potentially hurt the remainder of the season. By not getting a starter, we're sitting on career highs or recent career highs of Matthew Boyd going in the back end of the season. So, like an overreactionist would say that his lack of control in his last start was the beginning of him tiring. I just think it was a bad start. Good pitchers have bad starts. He had been so good. But you could see that. Cade Horton is pitching more than he's ever pitched. The Cubs don't have inning limits, as they've discussed in their pitching philosophy now. They're letting the body and the reaction, all the things that they check as, as a thing that they feel could, long-term address, like if there's like exhaustion or loss in velocity and those things before they actually let it have inning limits. But when Cade Horton's, at a career high every week as well, then that's a concern. So those are two guys. And then you're looking at the top in your rotation that's already missing Justin Steele and, Shodi Minaga, as, some folks have discussed. Like, you never want a pitcher to get hurt, but the fact that it was a lower body injury, his arm is pretty fresh, and maybe he'll get sharper and sharper. We're starting to see the K rate drop or come back up closer to last year's levels instead of, the weirdly low K rate he had early in the year. Maybe he gets sharper and sharper down the stretch, and he really ends up being, a top-end arm for this rotation. But there are nearly 1,500 innings pitched in a Major League Baseball season. And covering those innings, especially towards the back end, becomes important. And usually contenders supplement their teams to get fresher arms to cover some of those innings, and also address their team in a way so that they are a much better team overall, so that they're positioned for the playoffs. And I don't feel like the Cubs did that. I feel like they needed swing and miss, back end, shut down relievers to really fortify shortening games, the way that the Brewers have found in Anderson, Koenig, and McGill, that have made the end of those games, kind of a nightmare for other opponents. And they've deployed Aaron Ashby, as well as others on that roster to shorten games. And then they have that rotation that's really solidified with Mizorowski, Peralta, and, Woodruff coming back. And that's not to discount how good Quinn Priester has been for them and Jose Quintana. So they really have 5 starters and shortened games with some of their, really high-end relief. And as we talked about in Monday's episode with Jake McKibbin on why the Brewers are good. The Cubs have had a very good bullpen all year, but, Daniel Palencia is great, but he gives that Hector Rondon vibe that we had in 2016 where the Cubs went and got Chapman, because it's why not have Chapman and Rondon instead of Rondon? And obviously we know how well that worked out for the Cubs. And yes, they got 2 relievers in Kittredge and Taylor Rogers, and they're probably going to use Michael Soroka potentially as a reliever. So they've got some guys that can shorten the game if that's how they deploy them. And Craig Counsell seems to be pretty good at doing that. But when you're talking about the bulk of the innings that need to be eaten, we're leaning on Jameson Taillon coming back, being healthy, and pitching the way he was early in the year, which, metrics would say he would regress to being a fly-ball pitcher, still gives up a ton of home runs. Javier Assad being a key part of this. We still have Bird Cell and a bunch of others, Cam Sanders, that are part of this Cubs organization. But, you got to make some moves on the 40-man and stuff to get those guys involved, because a lot of the Cubs prospects, and an issue we're seeing with Miguel Amaya and potentially carrying an extra catcher, is Miguel Amaya can't be optioned to AAA. So once he's healthy, he's got to come to the Major League club. So what do we do with Reese McGuire, who's been a great part of the Cubs organization? So it can leave you feeling like the Cubs are being outplayed. And I'm sure a lot of folks are reacting, seeing Jed get that extension and then seeing this trade deadline, as frustrated. Ultimately, I would have loved to have had some transparency or clarity on what we were going to get from, Kyle Tucker. Is he going to be extended? But I think that was always an unreasonable outcome, because Kyle Tucker is going into a free agency year in which he is the top bat. He's going to command a lot of money. It's this not a similar situation, but it's the reason like the market drove up Dansby Swanson's contract. A lot of people talk about how that's a bad contract, but like in the vacuum of having to go acquire something, it's always going to be potentially more expensive. When there's not enough supply and the demand is there, and there are a bunch of shortstops there, and to me, Dansby Swanson has worked out. He's exactly what I wanted him to be. About a 725 OPS, 20 to 25 home runs, elite defense at shortstop. Like, that contract has worked really well for me. But Kyle Tucker, it's going to be challenging to see what he is. He's not going to give a discount. And he's earned the right to explore free agency and figure out what he is. But without that certainty and potentially not knowing however the team's budget is constructed, because this year was a weird financial step back, which allowed them not to pursue Bregman as aggressively as I think Jed Hoyer would have liked, and a bunch of other situations. We're not intimately aware of how much money comes to baseball operations. We know how much the Cubs are worth. We can be frustrated by how much the Cubs are worth and their lack of flexing their financial might. But when you don't have an idea of where Kyle Tucker is going to be, it can make you a little gun shy potentially on moving some of these top outfield prospects because you want to hedge that bet. So then it kind of we roll back to the question of, all right, then why move Cam Smith to get Kyle Tucker to solidify this group and then not continue to be aggressive in this market and to try to address the needs that this team actually needs in a moment in which they're very, very good? I don't know the answer to that, and I'm not sure we'll ever really have the privy of knowing the answer to that, but I'm interested to hear what Jed and Carter have to say about this deadline. I'm interested in the post, moratorium of how this looks as an organization, how they feel the trade deadline went, and, I'm going to continue to watch this team and hope that the pitching holds up, even though I'm concerned it won't, and that they can make a run. They don't need 5 starters in the playoffs. They need, 2 to 3 that are really good and a bullpen that shortens games. And, you look at that Braves team that won a World Series and kind of like patch-wise putting those things together towards the end of the game. Maybe now the Cubs move Ben Brown into a swing role in which he's only throwing max effort for 2 innings. Like, maybe there's other things. Now that the Cubs are past the trade deadline, they can use some of these guys at AAA, knowing that they're not going to be traded this year, who are on the 40-man to supplement the roster. They have insurance for injuries on the squad that they have. So, it's going to be an interesting remainder of the year. Yeah, I wish they would have addressed starting pitching. I wish they would have gotten a Charlie Morton, someone to be a 4 or a 5, to really make me feel comfortable about innings that are getting covered, every 3rd to 4th day when it's not Imanaga or Boyd, or we don't have to have all our eggs in the Imanaga and Boyd basket, or figure out how much left is in the tank for Cade Horton this year. But it didn't happen. So this is what we have, and we move forward. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I want to answer this question by Rogue Wave Creative. He's been super supportive of my show on YouTube. Thank you, Rogue Wave, for having a question on here. Is it fair to view that Assad and Taillon coming back and having good players beyond 25 is good long term? Yeah, I think that does look good long term. I think the Cubs are trying really hard not to do what they did last time and mortgage the future for the present. And they seem, until they are churning out prospects at a rate and gotten the trust of being able to manage injuries and things and having a farm system that constantly seems to invigorate or supplement the roster without having to go to the free agency or whatever other GMs are looking for, whatever the Cubs are looking for from themselves, until they have a really, really proven development machine, which I think that they've been doing better, then I think this is what we're going to see. But then if you're going to hang on to prospects, then I would like you to use your financial might to really push this team in a different direction. So Oh, and we got another question. So we got one more before we go. Thanks for the questions. If you do have questions, I'm happy to react to them. This will be available to download tomorrow. We got Brandon Olderbeck. Brandon, thanks for hopping on. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe. Really appreciate you watching the live stream. Is there maybe a chance, because of how the trade deadline went, that they're going to put all their baskets and potentially trying to sign Tucker before he becomes a free agent? Yeah, I think that's going to be really challenging. Kyle Tucker has earned the right to be a free agent. I'm sure that they possibly have discussed it with him. Like it would be interesting to find out that they have been negotiating that, and how people would feel if they, a surprise extension was announced sooner rather than later. And, but he's going to command a lot in this market. It's a very thin offensive class. What he brings to the table, every team's going to want. There's been, his hometown is Tampa, and there's been a lot of rumors after the Rays get sold that they're going to be more aggressive and they're going to take a swing at him. And of course, like the ever money printing Dodgers, I'm sure will be involved as well. There will not be a hometown discount for the Cubs. It'll be interesting to see how many years and the AAV. Honestly, I know people talk about he's not worth this, he's not worth that. I saw the Catman, David Kaplan, talking about this recently. He solidifies and raises up the entire offense by his approach, by his demeanor, by his craft. So this is a guy you want on your team, and you're the Chicago Cubs. The cost shouldn't be restrictive. It shouldn't stop you from being involved in other conversations because you have a player that takes X amount of money. And I also don't want to hear like, well, then that's so much of your budget. Yes, apparently the Cubs are operating on a budget, but at the end of the day, when you're charging $18 for hot dogs and you're charging, $20 for a beer, and you're selling hundreds and hundreds of those, and, it's really going to be hard for me to sit here and say, that money could be distributed elsewhere. They could really lean in and feel comfortable for one of the ballparks that, regardless of the type of team, look at the demand of tickets when they're winning. There's no revenue sharing. More Cubs stuff is sold. I'm sure they're going to sell a ton of stuff they're going to make money on for Rhino, which rightfully so. Rhino is a hero of a lot of Cubs fans and stuff, but Cubs print money, so use it and go get a player that solidifies this lineup. All right, so that's all I have. That's my reaction on the trade deadline. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. If you're watching on YouTube, come to the YouTube page, leave some comments. Find me on Twitter. I'm at CandidCubs, and leave comments that you have on the trade deadline. We've got a lot of Cubs baseball left. Cubs are only a game back of first place. They'll have the supplemented roster, this new roster that they'll be running with for the remainder of this year. So let's see how they challenge the Brewers. They've got a 5-game set coming here soon because of rain delays and other things involved. So they will be challenged. We will see how they do. Thank you so much for watching Bricks Behind the Ivy. And if I haven't said, 22,000 times at this point, make sure you're liking, subscribing. If you're listening to the audio podcast, make sure you're subscribing there and leaving a review, a 5-star review, so we can find more Brickheads. And hopefully some new and exciting partnerships and affiliate programs and announcements coming very, very soon. Working on some stuff. You guys will hear about it as soon as I have something to share. Until next time, go Cubs.